Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Steve Darby. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the Faculty of Environmental and Life Sciences, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to what is the first in our new series of faculty professorial inaugural lectures. So when the faculty decided to establish this lecture series, we had three main objectives in mind that we wanted to try and achieve. First and foremost, absolutely the most important thing is that the series is intended to be a celebration. We're here to acknowledge and celebrate the accomplishments of our colleagues who have recently been promoted to professor, and to provide them with an opportunity to share their research with a broad audience, including potentially members of the public, and in the presence of their colleagues, both here at Southampton and indeed colleagues more broadly, as well as their family and friends. And I think that idea of sharing in their research experience is a really important part of that process, because while it will be fascinating to learn about what people have done, I'm sure that in this series we will also learn about how people have executed their research, and in particular the people that have helped them along their way, on their journeys. And what I really hope is that those stories will help all of us to understand how key people in that journey have helped people, and how important those family, friends and colleagues are in our own work. The second objective was just simply to create a set of really enjoyable events that bring people together from across the faculty, but also more broadly across the university and perhaps beyond. And the idea is that these events might therefore create an opportunity for new academic discourse. You might have noticed that in the faculty that we are approaching these inaugural lectures as double headers, where we have two different speakers, each giving from different schools, giving their own talk. And that is a deliberate attempt at social engineering. It's not, I promise, a cost-saving measure. Rather, what we wanted to do is not only bring two different speakers together, but two different audiences as well. And I hope that later at the reception, you will mingle. We just want to see what happens when that kind of opportunity is presented. As our lecture series progresses, and I did want to plug that there are two other events scheduled for this academic year, one on the 18th of June down at Knox, which is on the theme of fish and their fingers, and a second event back here at Highfield on the theme of health beyond medicine. You will sometimes see clear links emerging between the paired talks, but on other occasions that link is deliberately less obvious. And in case you're wondering, today's theme is light. The third and final objective for our series was that we wanted them to be open to everybody. For that reason, each of the talks is going to be recorded and shared on our website. They'll also be live streamed. But over time, what this means is that we'll be able to grow what we hope will become a really important repository showcasing the very best of our people and our research in the faculty. And I think that should give us a tremendous opportunity over time to make an important contribution to our commitment to public engagement. So, these lectures are special occasions, and therefore I'm really pleased to see so many people joining us today, either in person or indeed welcome to everybody that's joining us online, many of them from very distant places around the world. So I'm particularly pleased that we have family joining us from the outskirts of Heidelberg and Adelaide as well. So you're all very, very welcome indeed. I hope that everyone enjoys the event. So what I would like to do now is welcome Justin Sheffield, the head of school for Geography and Environmental Sciences, to give a more personal introduction to the first of our two speakers. So, Justin. Thank
you. Right, good afternoon. Thank you, Steve. Welcome again to this social engineering event. Let's see how it goes a little bit later. So yes, a very warm welcome to this special occasion, the inaugural lecture of our newly appointed Professor of Aeolian Geomorphology, and I'll explain that a little bit later, and of course Jo will explain that in much more detail if you don't know already, in the School of Geography and Environmental Science here at the University of Southampton. It's my real pleasure and privilege to introduce Professor Jo Nield. Professor Nield has established herself as a leading figure in the field of Aeolian geomorphology, that is the study, correct me if I'm wrong, of wind-driven landscape processes in dryland regions and perhaps other environments as well. And she has demonstrated a commitment to rigorous fundamental research and impactful contributions to her field over the years. Professor Nield's career has been marked by a host of significant findings and publications, and I was reading her CV this morning, and it's true. Pushing the boundaries of our understanding of Aeolian surface morphodynamics in both dune fields and dusty landscapes. Through innovative field and computer modeling techniques, including the pioneering use of terrestrial laser scanning, which I think we'll find out a little bit more about in the talk. Professor Nield's work is nationally and internationally recognized, including by the Royal Geographical Society, via the Gill Memorial Award for outstanding early career research in Aeolian processes and arid landform development, and she is currently President-elect for the International Society for Aeolian Research, which is truly a marker of international esteem and leadership in her field. And I believe you will transition to President in 2027, I think. So this afternoon, Professor Nield will be sharing insights on her career, and this is a wonderful opportunity to hear what shapes her passion, because it really is passion for her work, and why you will find her in her office or a virtual office at all hours, mostly planning her next project, idea, and especially her next field trip. Professor Nield's research is grounded in fieldwork, the collection of primary data that underpins her science and is used to develop new theories and test hypotheses of how the natural environment works in dryland regions. And I'm sure you'll see in the next 40 minutes or so, this is the heart of Professor Nield's research, working with collaborators and students around the world in places as far-flung as desert regions of Namibia, Arizona, and Chile. And in fact, I can testify this. I just spent 10 years in the field with Professor Nield in Namibia on the first edition of a new undergraduate field course on arid environments, where I experienced firsthand her passion and dedication to her field work and the engagement of students in that field work. I mean, I think we have some of those students over here. Give us a wave. Thank you. Beyond her research achievements, Professor Nield is also a dedicated educator within the school, being nominated for and winning many teaching awards, and for many years leading our very successful and popular BSc Geography program, and is now leading on our preparations for the next Research Excellence Framework submission. Before I hand over, as Steve mentioned, we'd also like to welcome some very special guests who have joined online. So a member of Jo's family in Australia, I hope has stayed up through the night to engage and participate in this event. So a very warm welcome again to those who've joined online from far-flung places. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jo Nield to deliver her inaugural lecture. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks everyone for coming. I actually am really looking forward to today. When I applied to become a professor last year, the faculty came back to me and said, what will being a professor, what difference will it make? And I thought long and hard, and I'm an Aeolian geomorphologist, I don't care whether I'm a lecturer or a professor. But then I thought, I really, 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 really want to give an inaugural lecture, because it's the chance that I have to thank all the people that have helped me get here and to kind of share my story, and it's different from giving a normal lecture that I might give at a conference or a seminar. And thanks to Steve and the faculty for enabling this, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here, so thanks for coming. Hopefully there's a mix of kind of thank yous and bit of a history of how I got here, and then some science as well, so hopefully there's a mix of everything for everyone. Let me just take my watch off so I can try and keep to 40 minutes. Okay, so first up, back 44 years ago, I'm that little person in the pink cardigan down the bottom, next to my uncle who's here today representing my family, who was graduating from geology in building 44, that was then the geology building. And in 1981, I had no idea, I'm running away from the building. I didn't think I was going to ever come back here again. But move on 44 years, and Brian, one of the human geography friends I have in the department, has tried to recreate this photo. So if you look between the two photos, there's quite a lot of similarities. Maybe you can spot a few differences between the photos, at least 6, maybe a few more. So basically my hair colour has got a little bit darker from not being in the sun so much when I'm in the UK versus Australia. My tastes in animals have changed, so I used to have a little stuffed toy dog, and now I'm getting beaded artwork made for me from Namibian colleagues. Health and safety has maybe changed a lot, so you'll notice no sign of barriers or scaffolding in the 1981 photo, and now we've got lots of handrails for people to get up and down stairs, some bicycle locks, so maybe things are a little bit less safe now. People have to lock their bicycles rather than just leaving them around the place. And there's some trees rather than grass. But other than that, things are looking pretty similar. But I guess, although the building hasn't changed much, I've changed a lot in those 44 years, and there's a lot of people that have helped me change. So I guess first up, I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to how I moved from running away from the building to deciding to make my academic career here. And this is a nod to my mum, who loves making collages. So the first collage here is of beach holidays that I spent when I was a young kid growing up in both the UK, and then we moved to Australia when I was 6. I've made a lot of other collages coming up that were a nod to my mum, but not as good as this one. And I guess, interestingly, I grew up in a family that loved computers, so Mum taught me to code in BASIC before she taught me to read a book. So I guess some of my knowledge of coding comes from that aspiration when I was little. And Dad was very big into computers as well, so every time as I grew older, went back to the family computer, something has changed. He's an enterprise architect, so he was always practicing on our computers at home, so I got used to things moving around and using computers very early on. And we also grew up living on a sand dune. This is our house in Adelaide. Doesn't really look like a sand dune, but it was a sand dune. So I've spent a lot of my life in dunes, even if I wasn't really aware that I was on a dune. And a lot of time in nature as well. So Mum and Dad were brilliant. Growing up, we'd be always driving around the place to see different parts of Australia. There was always someone visiting that we could take on a trip and show them something of nature, or an exchange student that we just had to take to the Great Ocean Road again. So I got lots of kind of chances to see nature as I was growing up. But in terms of academic career, so then moving on from the kind of grounding and interests in things, I've had some magnificent mentors along the way. So first up, Andreas Bass, who was my first postdoc supervisor, and about 3 months into the postdoc, which was modelling vegetated sand dunes, he said to me, "Have you ever seen a parabolic dune?" No, was my answer. And so then he sat me down and showed me pictures of dunes, the things that I was trying to model. And I guess from there I started to fall in love with deserts and dune processes and started my trajectory towards becoming an Aeolian geomorphologist. And then we have Charlie Bristow, who took it one step further, and so rather than just seeing pictures that Andreas had shown me, Charlie was the first one to take me to a real desert dune. So he took me to Morocco, and I got to climb some proper dunes and lug GPR, really heavy equipment up them. You can see some of those pictures, Nick Lancaster, who we'll hear a little bit about later. And Charlie's really specialist instrument was this thing called a GPR. And his advice to me when I was just starting out using laser scanners or terrestrial laser scanners or TLS was, write 2 papers on this new instrument and then move on to something else. Sorry, Charlie, I didn't quite follow your advice. And I think I've now got 13 or more papers that specifically use this instrument and counting. And then there's Jack Gillies, a Canadian from the US, who I guess was the first person to show me process measurements and kind of included me in his field work in the US in a place called Jornada in New Mexico, and really showed me how important setting up field sites and how you need to be really careful and collect data in order to make things happen. Jack was also very, very good at balancing. So you can see there some white crates. Basically, in order to measure the surface, we needed to get our instrument as high off the ground as possible. So we found these really great big vegetable crates that we could stack on top of each other. The only problem is the instrument at that time, you needed to be next to it. And so looking at the laptop with me on the ground, Jack on top, trying to level this instrument. And then it was really sensitive to any bumps or anything. So Jack had to practice stepping backwards and basically falling off the boxes so as not to disturb the laser scanner so we could keep our measurements going. The other thing Jack taught me was about field food. So as a Canadian, his general comment was, people from England tend to eat stale cheese sandwiches. People from Canada know the value of good field food. And I've kind of taken that with me as well. So hopefully my friends here that have done field work with me know that that's one of the critical things that I bring to the field. The students know that as well, how important it is to eat good food to get good field work. And then Giles, who's here, basically I sent him a paper, one of my first papers, and said, what do you think of this? And at 8 o'clock the next morning, Giles was on the phone saying, this is brilliant, but I think your figures are a bit upside down. And so then things moved on from there, and Giles took me out to Botswana, where I first saw salt crusts, and so moved from dunes to dust and back again and all around. So I have much to thank Giles for, and I guess I wouldn't be here without all of the help and ideas that have spurred from Giles's mentorship. And then finally, Steve. I definitely wouldn't be here without Steve. Steve has been a tremendous, amazing mentor. Right from day one when I first arrived here, Steve met with me and worked out, what are you going to do? What's your research plans? He remarked all of my first year essays when I marked them in my tutorials. And basically has been there to support unwaveringly any questions, however crazy they might be. He was also the first one to introduce me to teaching in the field, which is one of my real passions now. So new lecturer coming through a geography department, not from a geography background. Steve had put me teaching the first year field course on the Isle of Wight. I didn't know what the Isle of Wight was. Mary gave me a tour of the Isle of Wight, which was nice. But Steve said, don't worry, I've got a postgrad that's doing a project on the Isle of Wight. He'll be able to do a project for you. And so I met Jules. And yeah, things have gone from there. This is my first grant that Steve came out and supported me with in Iceland, along there with a German exchange student who's now an academic in Germany. So hopefully our field work has then inspired other people as well. And most of all, it started to inspire my passion for field teaching. So when I did a tally earlier in the week, I think there's over 1,200 students somewhere in the world that I've taught on a field course somewhere. At a minimum, I think they know that they should be wearing their sun hats and sun cream. Maybe that's what they remember me for. But hopefully they've learned a few other skills as well. Stemming from that first trip to the Isle of Wight, a couple of trips to a roller in Switzerland, and then finally last week, as Justin said, like my dream came true to take students actually to the desert and show them desert processes, even if the river decided to misbehave and get in the way of the dunes. Aside from field teaching, I guess I've got to work in all sorts of places all over the world. So Justin mentioned a few, but so far 12 countries and counting, 5 continents. Some deserts are missing, but you can see here there are a lot of kind of clusters around the world as to where I've worked. And this is a shout to Matt, who helped make this map. Anyone that's done research with me knows that I hate maps, and I do everything I can not to include them in a publication. I don't know how to make them, but here's a map for you that's been made with some help. So as well as mentors, I've also got a lot of people that I need to thank that are my peers, and I wouldn't be here without them. So the first one is Matt. Without you, I don't think I would be a field person, spending time in the field with you, writing papers, evening cooking ceremonies and Carcassonne. Yeah, I can't imagine being an academic without you. Likewise, Jules, even today, we almost made you miss a meeting, having you down the corridor to discuss figures and graph and maybe just moan from time to time. Yeah, I don't think I would survive without you down the corridor, so thank you. And then Ryan, who's not here, but the boots are for Ryan. He's from Texas. Well, he's originally from Arkansas, but from Texas. And he basically finished his PhD about the same time as me. We became associate professors at the same time. He got me out to Texas A&M at College Station for a sabbatical, where he told me, you need to get some cowboy boots. And I got my cowboy boots, and I came back, and they have made such a difference. They're my power boots. Anyone in the department will tell you when you hear me clomping along, that means I'm going to go give a lecture, and it makes such a difference. I could see my ratings for my lectures go up immediately. I started wearing Ryan's boots, so thank you, Ryan. And Ryan I also have to thank, because he became a professor a little bit before me, and he sat me down and he said, Jo, this is no good. We're at the same level the whole way. I'm not going to be a professor if you don't apply as well. So Ryan convinced me to apply for this, so thanks, Ryan. I didn't always want to be an Aeolian geomorphologist. I always had dreams when I was growing up to be a pilot. Maybe because when I first moved to Australia from the UK, I got to fly in a plane, and actually the first place I landed was a desert. And I thought, oh, this is a bit odd, but then thought nothing more and decided I love planes, I want to be a pilot. Maybe if you look at this map, I've been to quite a few places that, although I haven't flown planes, I've still managed to travel, maybe more than a pilot might do. I've been to some pretty amazing places for fieldwork conferences, giving invited talks, and so on. When I was young, I also collected coins. I loved the different patterns on those coins, so I'd spend ages trying to find the different 50-cent coins, and you can see the very top one is a round one, a different pattern, which took was a very rare coin, I think. But at some point, I switched from being a coin collector to a crust collector. And so hopefully that's what you're going to hear about as we continue on with this talk. Also patterns. But it happened accidentally, so I only studied geography at high school because I didn't like English. I was incredibly slow at writing. So when I was in primary school, I missed most of my lunch times because I had so long to write the words that were on the board. And the same thing in high school, English I had to do till year 10, but I'm like, how can I get out of this English? I have to do a language-rich subject as one of my 5 final year subjects. Amazingly, geography counts as a language-rich subject. I can do science and still tick the box. So I decided to do geography, just because I didn't like English, basically. But as it turned out, I guess I was okay at geography, because I ended up getting 20 out of 20 and getting to go to the government house and be in an award ceremony, which my grandfather was able to attend, so that was nice. And my high school teacher took us on a field trip, which I guess is my first kind of like field experience, where I only got 24 out of 25 for the field report. But he also introduced me to someone called Twidow, who loved granite landscapes, a South Australian geomorphologist who just happened to be in his last year before retirement at Adelaide. So I managed to squeeze in an extra module and do his module, and so learn about geomorphology as an extra when I was at university, because I was taking an engineering and a physical and inorganic chemistry degree. Because my geography teacher had told me, you want to do engineering because that will give you a good job. Don't do science or arts, do engineering. And I kind of followed his advice and then didn't. To the point where I actually didn't graduate from my PhD in person because I was already here doing a postdoc. But luckily, because I'm now an academic, I get to wear my graduation gown every year to visit or support the students that are also graduating. So I think this is what I would have worn if I was graduating, the bottom photo, but I will never know. And while I was a PhD student, good things happened to do with lasers. So again, this was accidental. And you're going to hear a lot more about lasers when we get to the science part. But in the 3rd year of my physical chemistry part of my degree, Greg Mayfair said, I've got this little grant from the Department of Defense, and they've got this laser, and they want to see if they can use it to detect people in the field. So we want to test it out. Fine, this was like a little project I could do. So we had a laser, and we had a nitrile glove. Where's Peter? Maybe that you have in your labs as well. And so we fired the laser at this glove and nothing happened. And then we fired it again, nothing happened. And in the end, we had to put the laser into a cupboard and heat the cupboard up really, really hot. And then finally, the laser detected the glove. I don't think it was ever a success. I don't think the defense ever used our method that we created, but there you go. So that was my first experience of lasers in cupboards. And Greg also said, engineers learn how to do things and scientists ask why. And I think through my career, I've maybe moved more from being an engineer who was just like how things work, hopefully more towards a scientist that asks why and a geomorphologist. And Joe Davis, a PhD student, taught me how to use MATLAB, so I'm very grateful for his help. As you'll see in a lot of the figures to come, they were all using MATLAB, and he also had a laser. But when I got to Southampton, Tony Brown had started maybe a few weeks before me, and his idea was that TLS, or terrestrial laser scanner, is the future of geography. And so he'd bought a laser scanner, hadn't used it, had stuck it in a cupboard, and you can see there the cupboard today. In fact, when I looked in my drawer this afternoon, I still found the key to that cupboard, so I have it here with me. And so, yeah, I'd come from doing a PhD in undergrad with a slight interest in lasers. Here was a laser in a cupboard, could I do anything with it? And again, Steve's PhD student at the time came to the rescue. Jo Wheaton, who was then based in Wales, said, why don't you come to Wales for the weekend and I'll show you how to use a laser scanner. I got to Wales, it was pouring with rain. I hadn't expected that, it was summertime. But the good thing was we were laser scanning in the rain, and as we were laser scanning, the surface was changing colour in the view that I was looking at on the laptop. And these little specks were forming above the surface. So suddenly, a light bulb moment, maybe we can use the laser scanner more than just doing maps of the surface. Maybe I can push it to a greater extent. So that's where the title of this talk comes from, thanks to Matt. So the instrument's called a terrestrial laser scanner, but the acronym for the talk is telling landscape stories. And that, I guess, is what I've really tried to do in my career, is use the laser scanner to tell what's going on in the geomorphology in the landscape due to particularly wind processes. But it does happen quite slowly. So this is a movie of it on its fastest speed, but anyone that's been in the field with me knows it's not the fastest of instruments. It takes a whole hour to do a 360. The students will agree it's not the fastest of instruments. So I have a lot of photos of people, friends in the field, sitting around, lying down, waiting for the laser scanner to complete its activities. And I guess just a nod to all those people, so I wouldn't be able to carry the laser scanner by myself and set it up and do all the other cool measurements without those people. So I guess to me, fieldwork, which I love, is all about the friends that are doing the fieldwork with me. So pictures here of people in the field enjoying different there should be a video, but it's not playing. Okay. So yeah, people in the field with me, there we go, doing different experiments. That's what makes fieldwork so great, is just spending time. Other people have jobs where they go to the office, they see people during the day, they go home. For me, it's all about the time spent with people. So I see my fieldwork as my, if you like, my kind of hobby. It's what I love, it's what I'm passionate about, and the people are what makes that happen. Also the conferences. All of my field expeditions wouldn't have happened without the connections that I've made in conferences. So I met Giles at a conference, for example, which then inspired different fieldwork, Charlie. Even here you can see Eli's just seen one of his supervisors, who was the first person I sat next to on a bus when I was doing my PhD, and helped inspire some of my PhD work as well. So if you're a PhD student or thinking of doing a PhD or a postdoc, go to conferences. That's where you make the connections. That's where you then make your career. I've also had a lot of support from field scientists, doing amazing work, and lots of people supporting me as well, be they local, John the cowboy helping look after my field kit that's been there for year to year, or Kimmy, who always remembers that I like a particular omelette when I'm back in Namibia, in Swakopmund. And then, of course, the tech team, the student office FOS, and even the Building 44 cleaners, who all know who I am, and maybe have to clean up a little bit more sand when I come back from my field work. I've also gained a lot of additional skills, so being able to move luggage around, being able to drive where there aren't any roads. It's an interesting skill to learn. Being able to pitch a tent and see the most beautiful view that you could ever dream of out your window in the morning. And field food, obviously. How do you cook a gourmet meal on a campfire? How do you plan for 14 days of wild camping when you know that after 10 days you're not going to have any fresh vegetables that are going to survive? But it's always a treat when all of a sudden you discover that there's a chocolate bar hidden somewhere on day 14 of 18 days of field camping. or that you're able to have a cup of tea in the middle of doing some laser scanning. So that always means a lot. And I've learned to work in some various places that normally means I'm sitting down again here and nod to Jack. The Canadians gave me a chair. Everywhere else I'm kind of sitting on the floor. So I guess that's one of the differences between Canadian versus British field work. But I'm always back in the office, as Justin said. If I'm not in the field, I'm in my office processing data, trying to write up that data. And that data might come from -68 meters below sea level all the way to 5,058 meters above sea level. So covered a great breadth of different environments. But we're here to learn a bit about science as well. So I guess more than just the switch from coins to crusts, what can the crusts tell me? So this is the science bit. In 4 parts. So we'll start at the beginning where using the laser scanner can just look at static patterns at a variety of deserts I've been to around the world. So here you are in Chile. We're going to move from Chile to the US, to Namibia and Iceland. So here's Owens Lake, again a very rough crusted surface, a bit smoother here in Etosha in Namibia. Much smoother here in Lordsburg in the US, a little bit rougher and a bit more biology here off the coast of Texas, very rocky in Iceland, a little less rocky here in Namibia. But what I was able to do, and you can see here, 99 pictures of crusts flashing before your very eyes. This is my collection so far, thanks to the students to helping collect the last 5, so we almost made it to 100. But you can see when you look at these patterns, such a variety of shapes and sizes, and some clustering, some polygons, some round patterns, some small patterns, some large patterns. And I guess from a kind of science perspective, I can measure these things, but what does it actually tell me? And so some work that started off with Giles and colleagues in Botswana and Iceland, and Steve and Jules were involved in this as well, was to take those pretty patterns, those crusts that I'd collected, and see how those static surfaces were changing the wind that was going over the surface. Because if you've got a rough surface versus a smooth surface, as the wind moves over that surface, it's going to feel the surface differently. So if you think of a really rough surface, that's going to slow the wind down very close to the surface a little bit more than a smoother surface. And this can be very important for things like measuring how much dust you might get off of the surface, for example. So first of all, we took all these pretty patterns and we tried to classify them by how variable the patterns were. You've just seen 99 very different patterns. How do you make them into groups? So we clustered them, if you like, by how variable they were. Were they big or small in length or in height? And then we measured the wind above the surface and tried to link what the wind was doing to the patterns themselves. And we found that the most important thing on those patterns was how high the pattern was, not how wide it was. So we found a really strong relation in how the wind kind of slowed down as it got closer to the surface. If you've got a higher pattern, then it's going to slow down a bit higher, if you like, than a smoother pattern. So that, I guess, is the kind of engineering. The first part is like what is the pattern doing to the wind? But then come in some physicists from Germany to ask the question of why. So rather than just looking at a static pattern, we then look at how the dynamics of the pattern can change things. So we look at not just one snapshot in time, but here you can see a crust on a desert salt pan or playa surface as it's growing through time. So this is a movie from several months of the PhD student in Germany, Joanna, that was working on this project. And you can see the crust growing in height and also in width. And another example there, you can see 4 patterns of crusts, and you can see the edge of the lake that dried out earlier has wider and higher polygon shapes than the one that's closer to the center that dried out later. And so a lot of samples later, I've never known anyone to collect quite so many samples. She was collecting samples every centimetre down to a metre or so, spaced 10 centimetres apart across the whole of these metre or 2 metre polygons. I did all the labelling for the bottles. She did all the analysis. I think the analysis took quite a bit longer than the labelling of the bottles. But she basically proved her model and her lab results that these patterns were being driven, if you like, by the salt concentration under the surface that was being drawn to the surface and then sinking back down again. So you set up these salt cells, if you like, of evaporation, the salt comes up, then it sinks down again, and that kind of, if you like, makes these ridges of these polygons grow and get up and get wider and wider. So the older they get, the bigger they get. You can see this here on the top figure. We start off with a flat surface, and then you see more and more red as the crust gets bigger and bigger. And so we showed why the crust is changing, but it also shows that not only is the crust changing, but it's also changing your aerodynamic roughness, your effect of the wind, which then could mean, depending on what you use, you might be 200% wrong in your predictions of how much dust is going to come off that surface. So it's quite important to get right. Then moving on again, rather than just looking at growth, we can look even more dynamically. So this is me pushing the instrument more and more and more to the extreme. And here we're looking at not only growth of a surface, but also at that surface then migrating and moving across the surface. So these are a couple of examples from Namibia, from the US, and from the UK. Inspired first by my trip to Wales with Jo Nield, where you can see it doesn't look the most pleasant of places in the middle of summer. It was a little bit cold. But I had this amazing experience of seeing these bed forms developing and growing, and I said to Giles, what are these? And he said, well, maybe call them sand strips. Now we call them protodunes, but it kind of all stemmed from there. So this is what they look like in a bit of a nicer environment. This is Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, where I've done a lot of field work. Looks a bit nicer, but actually quite a bit colder. On some days, it doesn't get above 0 where we're working there. So sometimes the feet of the tripod that you've put up left overnight get frozen in the ground, and you can't get it out the next day. And also some examples in Namibia where it is a little bit warmer. But they're basically these very small bed forms. They're only a couple of centimetres high, but they move really quickly. And some of the original work was done by Gary Kachurik on Padre Island in Texas, and I'm really glad that I had the chance to work with Gary. He's now passed away, but he was a phenomenal scientist, and yeah, taught me a lot. And going back to his field site and seeing his protodunes that he had written his paper on in 1992 was really special. The other person that's worked a lot on these was Nick Lancaster. You can see a photo there from Rosie that was taken a couple of years ago, and Nick's photo from several decades ago. It looks the same, so you might get a single protodune or many protodunes. This is what they look like closer to home. So I had a dissertation student that we drove a very long day out to Norfolk and back again to look at some of these. And you can see here one of them moving that we measured through time. And the red patterns are high elevation, blue is low elevation. So this was the first kind of, if you like, quantification of patterns growing and moving through time. But we didn't get to the very start. Basically, it took us a couple of hours to set up the equipment, just the two of us, at which point they'd already grown to about 6 centimetres. So I missed the start of it. But never fear, later, many years later, in Namibia, with Matt and Giles, we got to a site, no protodunes. By lunchtime, it was covered in protodunes. So this is our first chance to measure these patterns emerging and developing. So here's a nice movie. You can see originally the surface is quite flat. If you look at the cross-section, you'll see a bump starts to appear. The white dotted line is a cross-section. You see the protodune starting to grow, and eventually it starts to migrate. So here we're measuring, if you like, multiple dimensions. We're measuring the growth and the migration through time. And so we move from a flat surface with no real evidence of a protodune. The protodune starts to grow in height but doesn't move. And then eventually it starts to get high enough that it then does move through space. In order to explain that, I then needed to push the laser scanner well beyond where it was ever designed to do. So to tell this story, I've kind of squinted my eyes and spent a lot of time on supercomputers and with MATLAB scripts and C codes to try and see if I can push it beyond its limits. And that's not only looking at how bed forms grow and migrate, but also what the transport is doing on top of those. So far we've just seen, if you like, DMs of the surface changing and migrating. But when I was in Wales with Jo Wheaton and I saw it raining and I saw the laser scanner picking up that rain, I was like, what if I can use the laser scanner to also pick up sand that's moving above the surface as well as the surface? And so why that's important is if you look at this movie, you can see sand moving across the bed form, the protodune. And you can see that that sand is moving at about the same height as a protodune. So we're looking at something that's a couple of centimetres high and sand moving over it that's a couple of centimetres high. And so using anything else, as soon as you put a tripod on that couple of centimetres high patch of sand, the sand gets moved. So the nice thing about laser scanners is that you can look remotely at what's going on. So we used the laser scanner to show that the sand moving on a gravel or moist surface is a little bit higher than the sand moving on sand surface. So maybe that has something to do with it. And you can actually see here in this cross-section, as the pink line, if you like, hits the bed form, then you drop down to that purple line. So you see this is the height of the saltation, the height of the sand bouncing over the surface. And when it gets to a sandy surface, it drops down a little bit. So the laser scanner is confirming the theory, if you like, that the transport is changing as it moves over something that's just a few centimetres high. And then even more amazingly, you can also look at how different shapes of bed forms change that behaviour. So not only are you seeing the drop in sand bouncing on the surface as the protodune gets a little bit sandy rather than gravel, but here you see the bottom cross-section a little bit taller than the top cross-section, a little bit different in shape. And there you see the shape of that protodune itself changing the behaviour of the sand above it. So you see a really strong impact of that taller shape versus the shorter shape on the sand moving above it. Which helps explain maybe this gap. So this is a nice example of heights of protodunes versus how quickly they're moving across the surface that we've measured with laser scanners. And you can see green, everything's dropping as it gets bigger, it's moved more slowly, which we've had a PhD student in Paris model really nicely. But if you look at the really small protodunes that are the same height as the sand that's bouncing over the protodunes, as they move, as they get higher, they actually get faster, which is not what the model shows. But here we're seeing a really small bed form is not impacting our transport. As it gets a bit bigger, it is impacting our transport. So there's a nice kind of crossover, if you like, of measuring these really small processes over the surface and how they're changing how the surface responds. And it's even more complicated than that. So you can see here some saltation going over the surface. So it's not just that the height changes as you go from a hard surface to a sandy surface, but also the sand moving across your surface is changing its height depending on the turbulence that's driving that. So basically there's a lot more still to do. That height relationship between your bed form and the sand moving over it is not as simple as it may seem. So there's still a lot more I can do with laser scanning, hopefully, in the future. So it's complicated. We still need to look at those transport form feedback, try and see how small changes in the shape of your migrating protodune are changing the dynamics of the transport over the top, and how stronger winds and weaker winds might change that as well. What does that mean for Mars? So I've currently got a paper that we're working on. We've had undergrads and postgrad students looking at these same behaviours on Mars, where you've got very different atmospheric conditions, but we get exactly the same shapes and the same kind of behaviours on Mars, which is quite interesting. And ultimately, can I push the laser scanner even further? What would be good was not just measuring transport and measuring bed form and measuring pattern change, but also can we measure something like the wind over the top of that at the same time, and really get so many dimensions that we can start to answer some really cool questions. So ultimately, hopefully that's given you a snapshot of some of the things I've been doing for the last multiple years. The really nice thing that I was able to do a couple of years ago was take the laser scanner to Australia to my nephews. So you can see there a couple of laser scan images of Labas and Isa, my little nephews that I'm trying hard to teach all about aeolian geomorphology. And yeah, my family have always supported me, and I'm really glad that you can be here to listen to this talk as well today. So, thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Jo. That's an absolutely fabulous talk, and you've done a really good job on leaving some time for questions. So if the colleagues in the room do have an opportunity to ask questions, then this is it. And we've got some people that will help ferry a microphone to you if you do want to ask something. Okay, so I'm going to go right to the back there first.
Hi, I'm not a geographer, but I really enjoyed your lecture, and thank you so much, and congratulations. So about what you said about Mars, that was really interesting. Do any of those rovers have a laser that can scan or does scan, and that's how you get your data on Mars?
Yeah, good question. It was on Mars, is there any rover data on the lasers and the topography? Not lasers, but there's certainly cameras, so there's imagery. So some of my colleagues have kind of made digital elevation models, maps of the surface using the camera imagery. One of my colleagues over in JPL is trying desperately to put together a mission where we can put instruments onto Mars, which would be amazing. And I guess one thing that may or may not work, the Dragonfly, which is going to Titan, which is another place with lots of aeolian processors, does have a laser on. It's like a little mini drone helicopter thing. And it uses the laser to see the surface so that it can navigate its way around. So one thing that would be really cool is to then use that laser data that it's using to navigate to then look at some of the processes.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, Justin.
I was just, fantastic talk, Jo. I was just wondering, when you talked earlier about being an accidental geographer, and there were certain events that you talked about that took you in this direction. Can you imagine a time back then when you went the other way, when you went left instead of right? And what do you think you might be in this kind of parallel Jo world?
So it's very accidental that I even landed in Southampton. So when I applied for the postdoc, I didn't even apply for the postdoc because Jo in the office next door to me, I hadn't started writing up. He said, there's this postdoc in the UK, it's only for 11 months, but it's doing the same type of modelling you've done for your PhD. I think you should apply. I said, oh, okay. I haven't started writing up. It wants me to start straight away. 3 hours later on a phone call, these were the days when there wasn't any Zoom or Teams or anything like that. I had not only been offered the postdoc, but also been told, don't worry, you can have 6 months to write up your PhD before you take the postdoc, which was quite nice. But I was still only coming here for 11 months. And then I guess towards the end of the postdoc, Andreas is like, you should be applying for jobs. Okay, so there was like a like a researcher position at Southampton on fluvial geomorphology, nothing to do with what I knew about. So I applied for that, and Steve said, I don't think this is really what you want to apply for, but we've got an academic post, so come back next week. So the whole thing was an accident, basically. So what would I do if I guess I was always planning on being an engineer, to the point where when I got the postdoc, I actually spoke to Gareth. Where's Gareth? On the phone, again, no Skype, said, I'm an engineer, I'm going to a geography department, is that a good idea? What are they going to think of me? And Gareth's like, no, Joe, geographers are really lovely people. And exactly that. I mean, this is my home. I just love walking around the corridor. People probably shut their doors if they need to be not interrupted, because I love talking to people around the corridors. So yeah, geography is amazing. Though I still don't call myself a geographer. I think I'm a geomorphologist, not a geographer, but close enough.
Any other questions in the room? Also, I do want to remind those that are following online that you can submit questions if you wish to do so through the app. Anything else? No? All right, that's fine. Okay, Jo, thank you again so much. In a moment, we'll transition to our next speaker. I'll explain what happens. I really loved your crust count, and as a sports fan, I think it's really appropriate that that somebody that spent a lot of their time in Adelaide is currently on 99 not out. Right? Many of you will get that reference, I'm sure. Okay, so we're doing really well. What I'd like to suggest, I'm mindful that we've been sat here for just over an hour, where if you wish to take a short break for 5 minutes, then please do so now, but we'll reconvene very promptly in 5 minutes' time for our next speaker. But before we do so, again, thank you so much, Jo, for a marvellous talk. Thank you.